Hello. So, ironically, after recording yesterday's video after about how being ill is often a quite productive state, today I'm having another ill day, which is very much not a productive state. It's really another bad digestion day, so things are a bit slow and unpleasant. But this is boring, so I don't want to talk about it anymore. So instead, I'm going to talk about something a couple steps removed related, which is when I was talking about the having a bad day phenomenon and sort of the not quite chronic fatigue experience, someone dropped me a message basically saying, "Thank you for talking about this." And um, which, yeah, I mean, it's useful to other people to talk about my experiences. And this is a thing that it's always helpful for me to be reminded of and to remind myself of, because like I know this is true, but like still in the moment it's, oh god, who wants to hear me talk about myself? You saw this right at the beginning of this where I'm just like, no, this is boring, I don't want to talk about it. And partly that's because it is boring, and partly because I have a strong internalized message that I'm not supposed to talk about myself. But every time I do, people tell me it's super useful, and I know this. And one of the reasons why this works so well is because I am just legitimately somewhat less inhibited about talking about, not about talking about myself. I'm super inhibited about that a lot of the time, but about talking about general phenomenon or phenomena that other people are somewhat reluctant to talk about. Like one of my, I think my, at this point, literally my most popular piece of all time was me just explaining that no, people don't actually work the hours that they say they're working. Um, and um, I think most people, by most people, I don't mean the vast majority of people, I mean more than 50% of people know this. But generally speaking, nobody says this bit out loud. And um, another example of this is that I think it's super important to talk about money. And so I'm much more willing to talk about money with friends than I think others are. Um, and don't get me wrong, by the way, I'm fully aware, and um, how could you not be on the internet, that a lot of why I'm able to talk about these things is privilege related. It's I'm reasonably financially secure. I come from a middle class background, white guy, blah blah blah. You know, standard disclaimers of privilege. Um, but I think it's sort of neither necessary nor sufficient, but it helps. Um, in general, though, I think that the real sort of underlying motivation for me is that there are all sorts of things about the world that I struggle to understand. I've sort of spent ages figuring out, and I find this super annoying. And the reason why it happens is partly that there are crucial features of the world that no one wants to talk about, and so you have to sort of essentially fill in the missing bits yourself, and infer from like the things that people aren't saying what they actually mean. And I hate this, and I don't want other people to have to go through it. So when I know what the missing bits are and I can just explain them, I feel quite morally obliged to explain them. And morally obliged makes it sound like it's a burden. It's I'm generally more than happy to explain them to people. Although, I mean, there's ongoing frustration of, oh God, why am I the one who has to explain this? And particularly on things where like I feel like I'm really bad at it, so I shouldn't be the one explaining it. But um, actually, the reality is that um, it's much harder to explain things that you're naturally good at. And also, I'm just generally much better at spotting patterns and explaining them than most people are. And so often I will do this as feeling like someone else should have done this, but in reality, like the number of someone else's who can do this is quite small. Um, Another thing that, as well as like skill, I think often there is bluntly a courage element to it. There's this general phenomenon called pluralistic ignorance, which is when the majority of people privately reject a norm, but they publicly adhere to and enforce it because they think everyone else else supports the norm. My go-to example of this is that it's very easy to imagine a society in which like literally everyone was bisexual, but they were normatively heterosexual because they thought and were just like secretly going around going, oh God, it's just me who's attracted to the same gender. Oh God, how what? And so and I'm not claiming this is what the society we live in is actually like. I think it's probably more like that than is often given credit, but the point being that these sorts of norms can sustain themselves. And breaking out of pluralistic ignorance is really hard. And because it essentially requires you to be like stick your neck out and be a norm violator. And although many of the things I talk about, like fatigue or working hours or money or whatever, it's not literally a instance of pluralistic ignorance. There is also often a second level thing of their people privately reject the norm about not talking about this and would love to talk about this, but they believe that nobody else thinks it's good to talk about. And some people genuinely think they aren't good to talk about. But anyway, I regard pluralistic ignorance as the enemy that is to be destroyed. And doing so is a non-trivial part of why I write, why I'm making these videos, why I just generally talk about my experiences where I can. That's 5 minutes, so goodbye for now, and I will see you in the next video.